On today's episode of Certain Point of View, we'll be talking about the toxic relationship Star Wars tends to have sometimes in the gaming industry and the recent revival of LucasArts' gaming division and how they are going to take the reins. All of that and more on today's episode of A Certain Point of View. Hey, Nerf Herder, I'm Matt Storm.
And I'm Geoff Moonen.
And welcome to another episode of A Certain Point of View. We're really excited to talk Star Wars and gaming. But before we get to that, I just want to tell you about our website, certainpov.com, where you can check out all of our podcasts. They're all on the site, and you can go ahead and listen to any of them. We have a wide range of different podcasts on the site, including one of our newer shows, Real News and Reviews, which I, Matt Storm, also host with Hans, the Real Movie Critic. But enough about that, enough promo. Let's get to what we're really here to talk about, Geoff. Star Wars and how in gaming, they don't know what the hell to do with this franchise.
Yeah, it's kind of been floundering for the last, you know what, I want to say 3 years, but it's probably closer to 10 years if I'm really being honest.
Yeah, I mean, they've had some off hits, but the problem is that I think it's the publishers that don't know how to handle it. I mean, look at EA. They've really struggled, the whole Battlefront and Battlefront 2 debacle when they rebooted that franchise. Battlefront was huge in the PlayStation Xbox era, and they were like, oh, well, let's bring that back. It makes sense. And the first game did okay, but all the drama with the loot boxes in the second game really tanked the sales for that game.
Yeah, and the first game that they did in this new iteration of Battlefront had some difficulties in terms of anyone who played it seemed to have a great time, but it was over so quick, and it was something that didn't really have much retention to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, also the problem with the first game is there was no story mode. So in the second game, there was a story mode, but the story mode was 4 hours long. Mm-hmm. Which, in olden days was not a bad length of time for a game or for a portable or mobile game. But when you're sitting down for a console experience, there's a kind of expectation to deliver somewhere between 10 to 20 hours at least.
And when you're trying to do that big of an experience, it's okay for a game to have a 4-hour experience today. People are a lot more charitable, so long as they are a good 4 hours, whatever length of time you're given, whether it's 4 hours or 400 hours, you want them to be quality time. But when Battlefront 2 was such a transparent revenue stream, and then to only give a 4-hour single player, it felt like a very paltry effort, or a very, okay, you complained about a single player, here's a single player, now shut up and give us your money.
Yeah, it felt very tacked on, which is usually what the multiplayer feels like. And in that game, while I understand that Battlefront is all about the multiplayer, and while it's not necessarily my thing, I get it, and definitely focus on that if that's the kind of game you're putting out. But if people are complaining about not getting a single player, a 4-hour single player is not going to satiate them, because those players want some kind of long, immersive experience.
Yes, and we've certainly, while the gaming landscape has changed, lots of people, lots of gamers out there still do want a single-player experience. Some of the big successes of the last couple of years have been self-contained, single-player, almost cinematic-style experiences.
Yeah, and I think the problem with Star Wars 2 is they don't know what to do, how to integrate with the current movie franchises either. Back in the day, every movie had a movie tie-in game. There was the super run of games, Super Star Wars, Super Empire Strikes Back, and Super Return of the Jedi, which were at the time fun platformers that now are impossible to beat. Mm-hmm. They were probably impossible to beat then, but I didn't have the patience to try then.
Fair enough.
But, they're not really doing that now. They could have done a Force Awakens game or a Rogue One game, but they're not. And I don't know if that's good or bad, because at least back in the day in the PlayStation era, it gave us stuff to try, Jedi Force battles and the Pod Racer game. Some of these games were better than others, but there was more variety. They tried a lot more, whereas now it feels like, well, what's the one big thing we can cash in on? They were working on a Mandalorian based bounty hunter game at EA for ages, and then they finally, I think it was 5-6 years ago, tanked the project because it just wasn't, they were afraid it wasn't going to make any money. It was a single player focused almost RPG style third-person shooting game. Those never do well. I can't think of a sci-fi series, Mass Effect, that does that really well. So why would we want one in the Star Wars universe?
Absolutely. Well, and it is a matter of the gaming landscape and character. I mean, EA is very much about, they're not putting out games so much as they are just, they're setting up, IV drips so they can just slowly take your money on a regular basis. But Star Wars can be a little difficult to develop for these days for a couple of reasons. You did mention the new movies, and while there has been a Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens, we forget how, they did come out with Star Wars games back in the late 70s, early 80s, arcade games that were tying into the films as they were coming out. The video game crash in America happened in 1983, the same year Return of the Jedi came out. So after the revitalization of video games in the West, any Star Wars game that was going to be made was made after the trilogy had already wrapped up. We already knew the identity of Darth Vader and the relationship of Luke and Leia. We know what happens to Han. We know who survives and doesn't. It's taken for granted how much of that story we know and can build from. Whereas as of this recording, we don't have the 9th Star Wars film. I don't think it even has the title right now.
Not
an
yet.
Official one. So if you make a big cinematic game that extrapolates from The Force Awakens or from The Last Jedi, all of that could get spat in the face when the 9th film comes out. We don't know.
That's true. And also, though, once Disney bought all of Star Wars, essentially, they purchased it, they claim that all of the expanded universe, except for what we deem worthy, is non-canonical, which complicated a lot of things because there were some canonical things that are now kind of defunct. For some it doesn't matter. I happen to like the Force Unleashed games, although the second one's story was terrible, but that one's considered non-canonical now, and there's really no reason for it not to be because it takes place before any of the new stuff comes out. And while they are doing some prequel movies, unless they do a Darth Vader's Secret Apprentice movie, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's no place for Starkiller. And
Right.
there's nothing that says there wasn't Starkiller.
Right. And so, also the fact that I think EA is more concerned about selling the Star Wars brand than really making a tight Star Wars game. And I think with the recent news, as we mentioned at the top of the show, with the revival of LucasArts video game studio and the fact that Disney seems to be wanting to revive that business and bring Star Wars back home to the owners of the IP, at least bodes well or better than it has been. Because, you can say a lot of things about Disney, the fact that it keeps growing and buying other properties can in a way be scary because of the homogeneity, but all the same, they do let the companies that handle their properties kind of do what they want. Look at, they own Marvel, although technically they don't own Spider-Man, Sony does, but what Sony was able to do with, Spider-Man was really great. And I feel like, Disney's not going to hold the reins that hard, or even all of the Lego Marvel superhero games. And they're working on Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 is coming out for the Switch. I think that at least in the hands of Disney and their own publisher, we might get some more quality and interesting Star Wars games because they won't just be about, hey, how do we make money? Because they're making money hand over fist everywhere. So,
Right.
I think the concern, of course, is still going to be to make a profit because at the end, that is part of the goals. But I think there may be more focus on gaming as a business and not just business.
Well, it also eliminates one of the other big issues of not just EA, but any other publisher or developer right now making a Star Wars title. We've been mentioning how much EA is just trying to make money. This is capitalism, this is business, but EA really infamously is just about getting your money. But if you are making an original IP, all the profits are for you. If you are building an IP off of someone else's, you have to also share your profits with them, whether a certain amount, a percentage or a certain amount or what have you. But some of that is going into paying off the IP holders so you can develop this game. So you enter into a strange kind of middle ground where the sort of people that want to make Star Wars games are developers that aren't quite big enough to stand on their own 2 feet, but have enough resources to make a game that when it says Star Wars, people are going to want it. EA is far too big for that, and is far too monoculture, I guess, or mono, like, these are our games, this is our profit.
I mean, also look at how they operate. You know, like Activision, they stick to their titles that they can put out every year, and the individual unique properties tend to not get the attention they need,
right,
and don't get the support. Like, look at BioWare. BioWare is a famous example of a development house that makes really great stuff. And then you look at what happened with Anthem, and love it or hate it, it's had issues since it was launched. And part of that is because EA doesn't care. They just want them to publish, but there's a time constraint. And this is a project unlike anything else BioWare has done, unless you count the Old Republic, which was still a very different kind of open online game.
That wasn't beholden to any movie, certainly.
Right. And, you know, Anthem isn't either, but Anthem is a wholly original IP, whereas at least, you know, the Old Republic they were familiar with because they've done the Knights games and they know Star Wars really well. This they're building from the ground up, from lore to story to gameplay, everything. And I think that's harder, especially with EA standing over your head. You know, and of course neither is going to admit that the other was a problem, probably, because they don't want
certainly not publicly.
Right. But I think with Star Wars, the reason, like, it's just baffling to me how EA has BioWare working on this original IP and doesn't think to also say, hey, depending on how your team is broken up, you should totally make another one of those Knights of the Old Republic games. Those were a huge hit. You know, they did really well. They were tight RPGs. We should make another one because, you know, the online one's still going and people seem to like it. And I think a RPG single-player experience might be what the people are looking for. But they don't think about that. EA wants your online dollars. They want you to pay for cosmetic upgrades and loot boxes and other nonsense in any way they can get you to do it.
And buy through the Origin store and all of that.
Yeah. And it's just, it bums me out because, you know, there's no reason why Star Wars can't be still a fun franchise to make games for. I mean, one of the most enduring Star Wars games that has never seen a console release that I think would be great in this era of gaming is the Star Wars Trilogy arcade.
Goodness, yes.
That's a thing that's existed for so long, is so infamous in arcades. I remember when we were all at MagFest, like, talking to our other co-hosts about how, like, we all spent so much money on that machine in whatever random grocery store or arcade we could find it in.
Yeah, it was a wonderful, strange cinematic experience. It was a little goofy. It was a little simple. It was a little quarter munchy, but God, if it wasn't fun.
Yeah, and if it was on a console, like, you wouldn't release it as a main release title game. You'd release it as like an indie, almost as if it were an indie game on the store for direct download.
Right.
Like, I'd pay $15 to $20 for that game.
I would love to see a game that, an old school game to come back and I think would fit well in the modern times is the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games.
Oh, yeah.
Because you could not only... There's now enough buttons on the controllers, and they could simplify things enough. You can do all kinds of rerouting of energy to shields, to weapons, to engines, through shoulder buttons and joystick use. But also, you can still have an online component to that. And you can have several people all be part of a squad together. You can do dogfight maps. You can do defense missions. You can do... you choose a side, Rebels or Imperials, and you log in for the day, and this is the mission of the day you need to do. I think it'd be pretty crazy. And you can still do cosmetic stuff. You could customize your ship. You can get your kills silhouetted on the side of your cockpit, and I think people would eat that up. I know I would.
Yeah, I mean, now that I think about it, like
Voice chat. Come on.
yeah, and like being able to do the red leader nonsense would probably be fun for a lot of people.
I would do this kind of online play purely for that.
Yeah, and the Old Republic did some space battles, but they were okay. They weren't great because they were designed for mass market. Mm-hmm. But like, thinking about that, like I played a game called Starlink on the Switch, which features Star Fox in it, and it's Ubisoft's newest like original IP. And while I haven't gotten very far in it, I kind of burned out on it. Not because it's a bad game, just because it wasn't what I wanted to play at the time. It does like land to space combat really well because your ship is the person, and so you transition from space to planet without any loading, and then when you're on the surface, you're flying around on your plane, doing missions, blowing stuff up. And while it seems a little simplistic, like you could easily do something like that in the Star Wars universe. Mm-hmm. And being able to visit every planet with seamless transition from space to atmosphere to land and do stuff on the planet's surfaces in an X-Wing or a Y-Wing or a B-Wing would be amazing. Like, this isn't rocket science to make a game like this. I guess maybe it is a little bit to make them work, but at least in general concept, they're not. And what drives me crazy is that, EA still flounders to figure out what to do with this IP when if fans like you and I can come up with these concepts that don't seem that radical, and that there are already formats for, like other people are doing something similar. Like nobody wants to be the guy who puts out a game and slaps a Star Wars skin on it. But that said, if your end goal is making money, that's how you make money.
Yeah, right.
And people would buy that. Or look at Assassin's Creed. It's a franchise that is a bit divisive, that some people love and some people hate, and that the newest game, though, Odyssey, is getting a ton of praise. What if you created a Rogue One style game, but instead of being an assassin, you're a smuggler, and you have to sneak in and take out targets, or they make a bounty hunter game where you have to sneak in and take out targets. Like, a stealth Star Wars game would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, and it would give you a chance to really take in the environments.
Right, because you'd have to navigate them, And there are Star Wars games that have had stealth missions, but like having a whole Star Wars game based on stealth that can still break out into action a la the Assassin's Creed games. But I think it'd just be really cool to like play as, for example, Boba Fett in a mission to take out a bounty, and you have to capture him without being seen because maybe it goes against another alliance you have or someone else you're working with. I don't know. Like, it just doesn't seem that difficult to think of that. Or even, like we talked earlier about the 2D platformers of the Super Star Wars series. I would play a new one of those. I mean, you know me. I love action platformers anyway. But,
Same.
Like, I don't understand how... And I'm hoping LucasArts is listening because, honestly, they're going to have to put out indie titles. I mean, they were good at that before others were good at that.
Oh, yes.
But imagine if they gave The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi the side-scrolling Super Star Wars treatment.
Just as a throwback. Give it to Inti Creates for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, it would just be fun. Like, and imagine doing that badass scene with Luke, the spirit of Luke, in 2D and like jumping around and like fighting Kylo. I don't know. I think it would be a lot of fun and be really nostalgia focused. And so you'd get those dollars.
Well, especially if you made it as over the top as the original Super series was. Right. Anyone who's played the first level of Super Return of the Jedi really remembers that scene from the movie when the little door droid to Jabba's palace was 25 feet tall and was attacking you, and you had to fight it and destroy it in order to get in.
Yeah.
So you could take small elements and make them huge and ridiculous. And again, the problem is you got to wonder about development costs versus return on investment on that.
Right.
You make something like that, and people are going to buy it. But how many, how much, and at what price point? I probably wouldn't pay more than $10 for that game. But if you made like a, 8-level like side-scrolling insanity thing,
right?
If you put it out and it's like, all right, it's $29.99, it's got 20 levels. I think people would kind of balk at that.
Probably, yeah.
And these are those difficult points that need to be navigated for the new Lucas games to flourish. And I think it's a great thing that it's going to be under one roof again. Yes, it is. The monopoly that's being built is precarious.
Yeah.
But having Star Wars games developed with the Star Wars license by, the company of Star Wars, to put it simply, Star Wars makes Star Wars games, then I think you can get that variation that LucasArts games used to have. And because they made some absolutely ridiculous stuff. They made those desktop adventure games that were popular for a little while. They made flight simulators. They made third-person action shooters. They made, they made games that had nothing to do with Star Wars, but would reference them within it because it was still LucasArts games. All of their point-and-click adventures, which I've played most of them.
Yeah, and that's another thing. How fun would it be to kind of release maybe for $5 or $10 a point-and-click adventure spoof of the Star Wars universe?
Oh my God, right?
Well, think about Rogue One. Rogue One doesn't have a ton of action in it. It has some, but it's mostly about this stealth mission. How fun would it be to have a level dedicated to sneaking around as one of the main characters from that game? I think that would be really neat. I think there's a lot they can do.
Yeah, you are. I think you're right, and because to kind of go back to the EA and Activision churning out game after game every year. With Disney owning Star Wars, we are going to be getting film after film. So we'll be getting a lot of gaps filled in, and we'll be getting a lot of cinematic properties to build games off of. And Star Wars and gaming have been, makes so much sense. They have made so much sense for a very long time. You just kind of have to hit the right balance. And I know I'll buy it.
Yeah. Well, also, I saw someone I think it was just a fan, took the original Pod Racer game and put it in the Unreal Engine.
Oh, man, really?
Man, it looked pretty. And I know it was just a tech demo. I know it was just to see what it would look like. But I'm not even a huge Pod Racer fan. But if they put Pod Racer in modern graphics, that would be totally worth it. Also, the Pod Racer had such tight controls and a unique experience. If you just added a little level diversity and upgradable ships and customizable looks, you could have a really fleshed out new version of that game pretty easily.
And if you wanted to make it a slight revenue stream style game, you make credits as a pilot, but you can also bet credits on who's going to win.
Ooh, yeah, that would be really cool.
And you could expand on it. You could make it the pod racing. You could make it T16 racing through Beggar's Canyon. You can take it to other worlds. Star Wars racing it's right there.
That's true, and it wouldn't just have to be pod racing. Doing all kinds of racing, would be really neat.
Swoop racing and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's all of that stuff. Imagine, swoop racing through Endor or on speeder bikes or something. Yeah, I could totally see that. See, we're just two schlubs talking about Star Wars, and we've came up with 3 or 4 great ideas. If you're listening, LucasArts, which I know you are, you're welcome.
Put out a Sabak game. Cowards.
Right? If you want to make money, there's a good way to do it.
Yeah. And you can't physically make those cards. They need to shift randomly. Elements of randomness built into the game, even before you make it into a game. Come on.
I know.
Do it.
Right? I still want the virtual chess game that C-3PO and Chewbacca play.
Oh, yeah, the holo chess? Oh, my gosh, yeah.
I think there was a PC version of that at one point.
I'm sure. And there's a lot of those wacky ideas, for lack of a better term, that I think people tried to make or develop in the early 90s. And you know what? It's been almost 20 years since then. Technology has moved on. Gaming has moved on. A lot of those ideas, I think, have a place again.
Yeah, I would agree. I think also because now we have better means to buy miniature games like that.
Yeah,
back then you had to buy physical
great.
Everything. Whereas now, you can release it on Steam or Origin or, on the Switch eShop.
Yeah.
And so it would be really a lot easier for people to get direct access to those games.
Yeah. However big or small or what part of the experience, or even if it's little mini experiences within a larger game that you can unlock or purchase or do. There's a lot more infrastructure that can be finagled and figured out. And hopefully the move to making Star Wars games in-house, as it were, will allow for those ideas to flourish and not just be another grab-it cash cow.
Yes, we can only hope, at least.
You know what? This is a new hope for us.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap this discussion up. Thank you for tuning in, as always. Like I said earlier, you can find all of our podcasts on the Certain Point of View Network. There's so much to listen to there. But for now, just a reminder that I'm Matt Storm.
And I'm Geoff Moonen.
Stay scruffy, my nerf herder.